So, the Switch 2 Direct happened the other week, and we all thought that Final Fantasy IX Remake was going to be revealed, given the fact that Square Enix launched a Final Fantasy IX 25th anniversary website just a couple of days prior. Turns out, nope. Now, we've been hearing about this potential remake since as far back as 2021, which was about 4 years ago now. So, some of y'all think that I probably sound like a broken record, as well as some other content creators. So, am I willing to finally say that Final Fantasy IX Remake is in fact not real?
No.
So why not? And when will I finally concede so I stop sounding like a broken record? Well, you'll have to stick around because I'll tell you that later, but we need to talk about these formism figures and what it can tell us about this potential remake, as well as new evidence that might indicate why it may not have been shown at the Nintendo Switch 2 Direct. I wasn't making content here on YouTube back in 2021, but sometimes I wish I was, because then I could point to old videos of me saying that we found out about the Final Fantasy IX Remake far too early. Except I can't, so you'll have to take my word for it. Or not. There's not much I can do about that if you choose not to believe me. Anyways, my take at the time was that they were no more than 1 year in development, and that Square Enix likely wouldn't have greenlit the project until they knew how successful Final Fantasy VII Remake was. Given that Final Fantasy VII Remake was successful, my guess is that's why they started development on Final Fantasy IX Remake. Why not Final Fantasy VIII? Well, because Final Fantasy VIII is the brainchild of all the same people that worked on Final Fantasy VII, and those people right now are just a little bit busy with Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3. But if you're watching this video, you probably already know that. I'm just preaching to the choir here, right? Final Fantasy IX, though, is possible since it had an entirely different team, and they could certainly develop a new remake simultaneously as Final Fantasy VII. So, since I figured it didn't start development until 2020 at the earliest, my prediction at the time would be that it would release sometime around 2025, as that would mean it had a 5-year development. And well, here we are. It's 2025. Still no official reveal, but things are certainly ramping up. It's possible that my prediction was off by a year, but we're still roughly within the time frame that I expected. So even though it didn't show up at the Switch 2 Direct, I'm not backing down on saying Final Fantasy IX Remake is real, especially with some of the things I've just recently discovered. If you look here at the Square Enix store, you can see that under Franchise, it lists Final Fantasy IX. As far as I know, Final Fantasy IX is just one game, and there haven't been any sequels or spin-offs made of this one game like Final Fantasy VII, which is why that game is listed as a franchise as well as Final Fantasy XIV with all of its expansions. And I already know what you're thinking. If Final Fantasy IX is listed as a franchise, then does that mean its remake is going to be like Final Fantasy VII Remake and split into multiple parts? Well, keep in mind that Final Fantasy XVI is just a singular game, although it does have some DLC, and it's also listed under this franchise section of the website. So I wouldn't say this is any level of confirmation that a Final Fantasy IX remake would be multiple parts, but it does mean something. It almost certainly means that the remake is real. I mean, guys, there's no way Square Enix would go this far with the 25th anniversary of a single game releasing all of this new merch to put it on the level of a brand new numbered entry in the Final Fantasy series like Final Fantasy XVI if they weren't planning on bringing it back in some big way. And I think it's important to point out that they are in fact putting this on par with a main numbered entry like Final Fantasy XVI. So maybe this remake is much bigger than we expected. Maybe it didn't show up at the Switch 2 Direct because it's being built from the ground up as a PlayStation 5 AAA title. Will it even run on the Switch 2? If I were a betting man, I would say probably. Especially since Square Enix has said that they're planning to go multi-platform for most games. Although they did just recently announce that Bravely Default Remastered is going to be a Switch 2 exclusive, even though it's a 10-year-old game on the 3DS that probably could have been ported to the Wii, let alone... Anyways, how big will they go? I mean, most of the rumors seem to point to the fact that it was going to be a 1-to-1 remake and not much was going to be improved, but something tells me it's a little bigger than they were saying if they're willing to categorize it on the same level as their latest numbered entry Final Fantasy. I personally don't think it will be split into multiple parts, but I wouldn't rule out the possibility. It's also entirely possible that it is a 1-to-1 remake, but that they've just put a significant amount of effort into the production of the game, such as really enhancing the cinematic quality of the game, but it could also mean that even though they're not splitting it into multiple parts, it may be that they're still adding a lot of story content to the game and extra scenarios, including side quests. I mean, a AAA JRPG now is sort of expected to be a 100-hour experience these days, especially when you look at games like Xenoblade Chronicles 3, Metaphor ReFantazio, Persona 5, and even Final Fantasy VII Rebirth itself. Hell, even the Fire Emblem games these days are really long, so it's entirely possible that Square Enix could be taking this game in that direction. But maybe you're still not convinced that this remake is real. Okay, well, let's look at some of these Formism figures that they're releasing as part of this 25th anniversary. Let's start with Zidane. It looks like the Zidane that you know and love, right? Absolutely. But if you look more closely at this figure, it looks like this is based on a different design. The most observable feature is his pair of daggers. These are the Mage Mashers, which were featured in the original game, but they appear to be much longer than they were before, kind of similar to how they were in Dissidia. Now, could this mean that, like in Dissidia, he'll be able to combine them together to form the double blades that he also uses in Final Fantasy IX? I don't see any evidence looking at this figure that these handles on his Mage Masher could be used to connect to each other, but the idea may not be without merit. So maybe? But probably not. Now, the rest of his design is very true to the original, but there are even more subtle changes. For instance, his pants appear a bit more cloth-like compared to the original. In the original, it almost looked like his pants were made of leather. This time, you can see some cross-stitches indicated it's made of a different material, like wool. Also, his tail looks more furry here. In the original, it looked more flat, almost like extra skin that extends from his butt, like a butt whip. I'm kinda liking this new tail better if I'm being honest, and there's also something interesting going on with his eyebrows, but we'll get to that later. Now, let's look at Garnet. She appears to come with what looks like the healing rod from the original game, except there's a very small difference. In the original, some of the markings are green, but here they appear black. Now, you might think I'm just crazy, but there's also a different figure of Garnet that also comes with the same looking healing rod. And in that figure, the markings are green, meaning it's consistent with the original design. So it appears that there is in fact a deliberate change made here, despite how small it may be. Do I care that they've made this small change? No, but it does prove that this new figure is based on a new design. But there's more. You can also see that the lacings on her corset are a bit more chaotic in this figure, with some of them overlapping each other. But in the original, the lacings are not only very straight, but also have this small metal piece around the holes that they are supposed to go through. This is obviously very trivial, but again, the original design is consistent with these small details even in the previous figures of Garnet, which again proves that they've made changes to her design for this new figure. Is anyone going to care that these changes have been made? Probably not. But that's not why I'm talking about them. I'm talking about these changes because it is just even more proof that this game is being remade. Overall, it's hard to tell from just these images, and I'm not about to go so in depth with the analysis here on her design, trying to figure out the exact scale of things, because it's probably not worth my time. But maybe it's just me, but it does look like she's slightly more shapely, if you know what I mean. So if you were worried that they might make this game for the modern audience, I think your worries will be put to rest. When I said this game might be even bigger than we thought, it might be even bigger in more ways than one. So why are these details important? Well, you have to remember that if you work on creating these figures, you have to maintain the exact details of the original concept design, meaning you've got to cross your T's and dot your I's. If they're making these small changes to the characters, then that means that these figures are in fact based on a new design. If they're not remaking this game, then why the hell would Square Enix pay all of this money for Toshiyuki Idahana to reconceptualize the characters again just for some new merch, right? So, will there come a point when I give up talking about this potential remake or finally acknowledge that it isn't real so I stop sounding like a broken record? Yes. If they don't announce this remake by July 7th, which is the actual date of the Japanese release of Final Fantasy IX, then I will have to concede and say that it isn't real. Between now and then, I would say there's a very real chance it will show up somewhere. I just have no idea when. But with all the evidence that we have, I am very confident this game is still in fact real. Square Enix just needs to show us this damn thing. But there's another thing we haven't talked about yet, which are Zidane's eyebrows. If you look closely, they are uneven. Now, people's eyebrows tend to move in unison with one another, unless you're like me. So what could this mean? Well, I think this indicates that there might be more emphasis on handcrafted animation in this remake, which is something I touched upon in a previous video where I discussed whether or not it would be worth remaking Final Fantasy IX, which you can watch right here.